Richard J. Stillman. I served with General Patton's 3rd United States Army from the time we arrived in England in March of 1944 until Patton's relief of command of 3rd Army in Bad Tölz, Germany, October 7th, 1945. And I'd like to introduce 3 of my distinguished colleagues. They also served with General George S. Patton, Jr. in 3rd Army, and I'd like to introduce first Robert Campbell. Name, rank, serial number, background, Bob?
First Lieutenant Robert Campbell, infantry. Excuse me. I started with General Patton at the Desert Training Center in 1942, and then it ended with him in 1945 in Europe.
I'd like to introduce Harvey Frazier, my good friend and colleague from West Point days when we served on the staff and faculty together, and also in 3rd Army. General Frazier.
Thank you very much. I was a lieutenant colonel in the 3rd Army. I started the war in the 1st Army, and after we crossed the Rhine River, where I built one of the bridges, we headed south with the 3rd Corps and joined this famous 3rd Army, crossed the Danube River at Ingolstadt, and then I was ordered into 3rd headquarters of the 3rd Army. I reported to the engineer there. He said he had a job for me. I said I didn't want any job. I wanted to go to the Far East. He said, "God damn you, Harvey, the government's got $20,000 in you, and I'm going to get it out, and you're coming down here, aren't you?" And so I did. And I was head of engineer construction, which was a big job at that time on rehabilitation, and stayed there until Thanksgiving Day when I came back to the States.
Thank you, Harvey. Now my good friend Ed Steinmeier. Colonel Steinmeier had a very responsible position in the 3rd United States Army headquarters. Ed.
I was a major then. That was my highest rank during my time in Europe. But I was in 3rd Army 22 months overseas in Europe and England, and started in at Knutsford, England, when he gave his famous speech. went overseas to France later. I was assigned with the Army Transportation Officer, Colonel Reddy, to go down to Fort Suffolk at the invasion headquarters. I was assigned down there in a unit called American Build-Up Control, which was attached to Bradley's 12th Army Group that hadn't been named out loud at that time. But I was down there from May of '44 until about September of '44. I was there before the invasion started, and during and after. And I closed the office down there at Fort Suffolk because Colonel Redding went over to American Build-Up Control East and started becoming the transportation officer for 3rd Army. And so I got across channel with my staff that was with me and some transportation, and caught up with 3rd Army at Verdun, about Verdun, at a place called Braquis. And then I got in the system. Major Lindau was in charge of the war room then, but at Etienne, France, it was a wonderful experience because General Marshall visited our headquarters in the chateau.
You have a picture of that, Ed Steinmeier, as I recall, of
Right.
Marshall with Patton. And you could see who was the commander because, remember, Patton was bowing to Marshall, who was the Army Chief of Staff.
Yeah, he was looking good. But from then I was with Third Army in the war room. In the last 6 months, I was the senior officer, maintenance officer in the war room, and till after VE Day, and I went to Baton Rouge with the Army, and was there until June. At which time the war room was put into mothballs, and I was released back to the combat engineers that I came from. So I was then in the Army of Occupation 7 months.
Great.
And returned home safely at the end of 45.
No, when we're ready.
Okay, we're ready. Go ahead, go.
I had a career in the regular Army infantry and retired in 1965 and got my PhD and went into teaching as a professor at Ohio University and then later at the University of New Orleans. And for over 50 years I've been studying Patton and his leadership principles. And what I observed during that time frame, actually between 1965 and present, so we're talking 35 years, I had a chance to really examine Patton's leadership qualities. And I came away with one word to describe what George Smith Patton Jr. had. It was perseverance. And there were 3 areas in his leadership concept, talking with him at the end of World War II about it when we had time and my office was next door to his. He said, prepare yourself, dedicate yourself, be creative and flexible, and good fortune will follow. And so Patton went to the United States Military Academy where he could get the finest education. That's where Harvey Fraser got his education, the finest education in the world. Before that, he spent a year at VMI. But from the time he was 8 years old, he played soldier with his younger sister, Nita. And he would have a wooden sword, and he would play soldier and say, I am a lieutenant general. He thought that was the highest rank. And so here he was at 8, setting his goals, setting his objective. I want to be a lieutenant general. And he never lost sight of that. And I point out on my book here, on General Patton's timeless leadership principles, how he emphasized the importance of anyone can have a successful career and life if they follow the approach that he taught me. Prepare yourself, dedicate yourself, be flexible and creative, and then good fortune will follow. He went from the United States Military Academy, where he was an athlete. He went on to become an Olympic contestant in Stockholm, finished 5th in the Olympics, the pentathlon, went on to fight in 1916 and 17 in the punitive expedition under Black Jack Pershing, who was the top commander in Europe and then later became the top Army Chief of Staff. Patton rose then from the punitive expedition, a lieutenant, to World War I, where he rose from lieutenant to full colonel, and he moved from cavalry into the tanks. That's the creative part that he emphasized to me. Whatever profession you go into, make every effort to know as much as you can about it and change with the times. And he moved then from the cavalry to the tanks. And he rose to full colonel, came back to the States. Peacetime, he was reduced all the way to captain, moved up, but didn't get his rank back to full colonel till 1938. Well, as we remember, George Catlett Marshall became Chief of Staff, and he was kicking out older officers, and Patton was just on the verge of being kicked out. I first met him when he was a colonel in the Louisiana maneuvers as an umpire in 1940. And I then learned what profanity was all about. As Harvey and I know, he had a marvelous profanity vocabulary. But it covered up, keep this in mind, he had attention deficit disorder, he had dyslexia, and he answered the phone this way, "General Patton speaking." And those of you that have seen George C. Scott with his booming voice was entirely different. So he had these three handicaps to overcome. So that perseverance that he talked to me about, persevere, persevere, prepare yourself, dedicate yourself. He made every effort to go to the top schools. He went to the Command and General Staff, the cavalry. He was Master of the Sword at Riley. He was also a graduate of the Army War College. So he went to the top schools, and he wrote articles so that he really dedicated his life to being the best soldier he could be. And then with this flexibility, he went on, of course, to become what I say is the greatest combat general the United States and perhaps the world has ever produced. And I have a video on it, a four-part. This was on leadership, and we'll go on then to his lifespan and talk about his creative concepts. But that's a brief background then on my boss, and we have a chart here that shows General George S. Patton, Jr., 1885-1945, and it shows how he moved from lieutenant to full colonel, back to captain, and ended up as a four-star general.
You want to?
You want it up higher?
Yeah,
We'll put
that's
it up higher for you,
Beautiful.
Peter.
Tilt it towards me so it
Can you
doesn't
see it
reflect.
now, or you want it up higher?
That's fine. Stretch it and then tilt it towards me.
They want
That's
to
it.
cover up.
Stretch it and what?
Okay, tilt it towards me. That's good. So it doesn't get the reflection.
Tilt it this way,
That's good.
forward.
Not too much, that's good. Just like that. Okay, good.
This shows from 1885, he was born near Los Angeles, California, Lake Vineyard. They had a beautiful ranch, and he had horses and dogs and swimming. So from a sickly youngster, he grew into a 6'2", 227-pounder when we met him, a marvelous physique and figure, and he did it by this hard work and perseverance. But below are the events that happened in his lifetime, and it shows that he fought in 3 wars, and during peacetime he devoted himself to preparing for war. Every moment of his life, practically, he wanted to do one thing: fight those, as he pointed out, and I will not say the appropriate word that he used, but he wanted to fight the Japs, he wanted to fight those communist bastards, he wanted to fight anyone that he felt would do something negative to our great country. And he warned us, when I went around with him at the end of World War II inspecting units as they were going back, he said, "Remember this, if you don't remember another thing about George Smith Patton, Jr., you don't have a goddamn fire department because you want a goddamn fire. You don't have a goddamn military because you want a goddamn war. But if you don't have a goddamn military, you will have a goddamn war." He was one hell of a soldier, and that's why we're saluting him tomorrow on his 115th birthday, and we're going out to the Desert Training Center, the Patton Museum out there, which deserves so much credit, one of the most outstanding museums I've ever seen, and Margaret Rouchet deserves so much credit for taking over and moving it ahead and not getting public funds, but doing as Patton did when he contributed, for example, at Fort Myer, beautiful Oregon. He took a lot of money out of his pocket, and the people at the museum, the Patton Museum at Chiriaco Summit, deserve great credit too, and that's where we're going to be tomorrow celebrating, and that's where General Harvey Fraser was picked as the Patton Award ceremony last year, and certainly was so worthy of that honor. That's a little background on my old boss, George Smith Patton Jr.
Richard, one thing you didn't say, that all the time he was studying war, he was a very avid reader on military history.
How
And he could remember. So, you don't get to be three-star general by spitting in the air.
Exactly. And that's so true, and that's why he could talk and never used notes, and that's why he was so exciting as a speaker. But this was forced on him because he didn't even go to school till he was nearly 12 years old, and he couldn't read or write with his dyslexia and attention deficit disorder. But he overcame all that, and his parents read to him, and he was such an avid reader of history. Absolutely, Harvey.
Yeah.
Talk
All right.
also about Patton and dropping the, you know,
Oh, yeah, this here.
yeah, you got some good.
Well, 1942, I was assigned to 1st Armored Corps at the Desert Training Center, which was commanded by General Patton. He came out there to start the Desert Training Center in March, and I joined him in the middle of April. And I was appointed motor officer for 1st Armored Headquarters. And when I took it over, it was a disaster. We had all Patton's vehicles. He had his tank, he had a staff car, he had a Jeep, and a sedan. And I was trying to think of it. We had 4 sedans, and they were available to each of the section chiefs. And Patton's staff car, he'd take it and go out in the desert, and he'd come back and he'd call up the motor pool. He says, "Send that Jeep down to Ordnance and get a steel bar put across the back of the seat." So he had that steel bar down, and then Sergeant Mims was his driver. And Sergeant Mims would come to me and he told me, he said, when Patton said stop this vehicle, he meant stop. And he grabbed that, hand that bar in the back of the seat and stand right up. And then another time, we were up in the desert with the light tanks. We had 4 light tanks, and they were mainly taken out there for show. And Patton come back one day with his tank and called up and wanted to know what we could do to get that gun out of the turret. He had no room for his legs. So I took the tank down to Ordnance. We went over it and decided what we'd do. We pulled the gun out and made a dummy wooden barrel with a cover on it, and that's what you see in this picture. That's a dummy wooden barrel.
That was so he could ride in the tank comfortably, huh?
Oh yeah, so he had room for his legs.
Yeah. 6'2", yeah.
And then another time, we had the light tanks out in the desert, and he was in one of the little Piper Cubs with a spotter. And picture of this tank, I think it's a picture I got here. We were just out there kind of more or less fooling around with him. He flew over, he dropped a note down to me. Now I'll read what it says on the note. He says, "Take covers off these 2 tanks when I wiggle my wings. Set off colored red smoke near the tanks. Signed, George Patton."
That's great.
That's the real thing, right?
That's the real thing.
That's about it.
No, tell them all.
Okay, let's go.
Already?
Yes.
I want to recall another time that Captain Jim Galloway, which was acting aide for the general, come down to me one day and wanted to know if I'd like to go have dinner at General Patton's house. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, he has 3 of his nieces up there, and he'd like to have 3 officers come up to entertain him." So Captain Galloway got myself and a First Lieutenant, Jack King. Of course, I was only a 2nd lieutenant. So we arrived at the house and sat down to dinner, and of course I got the, being the youngest one, I got sit next to the general. And we conversed and carried on a good conversation there, and we had dinner. And after we finished the dinner, Beatrice, his wife, sat at one end of the table and he sat at the other. She passed the dessert around, and everybody took it except the general. They got back to Beatrice and she said, "Georgie, you didn't have any dessert." He said, "I don't want any." She said, "Well, I made that just special for you." Banged his fist down there and, "God damn it, send it down to me." So we ate the dessert. Shortly after that, he got up and lit a cigar and dismissed himself. We stayed around there probably another half hour, and that was it.
That's a great story. Did he have a dog that you noted when he was...
You on?
Not Willie, huh?
Not Willie, no.
Well, I think he called it Willie.
Oh, I'll be darned.
He had a tent in the headquarters, and Sergeant Meek, his orderly, had a tent next to him. And I used to walk from headquarters company over to headquarters and walk right past his tent. And he had this dog would sit right out in front of that tent, guarding that tent. And I always recalled the name was Willie. I may have been wrong.
But anyway, one other point. He mentioned earlier Sergeant Mims, who was Patton's driver, and he stayed with him all through the war. And he has a great story, Bob, because he later headed up the post exchange for 3rd Army, and Sergeant Mims came into his office when we were where? We were in Nancy?
Right after we got into Nancy.
Yeah, you tell him that story, Bob.
Sergeant Mims come up to me, and of course I had known him for a long time. And he said, "Lieutenant," he says, "can you find me a job in the post exchange?" I said, "What are you, crazy?" He said, "Well, General Patton's killing me." He said, "I got to get out of there."
And here Patton complimented Sergeant Mims after he left him, and all the time he said that he'd been driving, Mims had never had an accident. Well, a couple months later, sadly, Patton was in an accident with another young driver, but this driver, it wasn't his fault at all, but it was a fatal accident that killed him. But it was quite remarkable, you know, here saying that Mims, you know, he's killing me. This was his reaction to Patton. That was great.
Can't stop that. Go.
My name is Harvey Fraser, and during most part of World War II, I commanded the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion. 1st and 1st Army until we got across the Rhine River, where I built one of the first bridges across the Rhine. And then I finally went and moved to 3rd Corps, with 3rd Army with the 3rd Corps. And we were past the Danube River, we built a bridge there under fire. And then I later got into headquarters and was head of construction. And Patton had the idea that we wanted to get things going down there in peace times. You know, the roads were all messed up and the water in the cities were messed up and the fires were burning. And General Eisenhower put out an order, said, "We will not fraternize with anybody that was ever a Nazi." Well, Patton didn't believe in that. He said, "I don't give a goddamn. I want the bridges in. I want the waterworks going, and I want it done right away. And when winter comes, I want that damn material to stuff snow blowers and everything to clean the bridges off and the roads." So we did that. And as you probably know, Eisenhower talked with him about it several times, but he said, "I want to get the job done here." So it finally got relieved because he was consorting with the Nazis. Well, I'm telling you, he did a hell of a job, or else it would have been a miserable winter. One time the engineer of 3rd Army come in to me and he said, "Harvey, General Patton wants a mathematician up there in his office." This was at Bad Tolts. And you know, Patton had an image of being a tough son of a bitch, you know. So I only had one mathematician. His name was 2nd Lieutenant Kelly Benton. I said, "Kelly, General Patton wants to see you in his office." "Oh, no, he doesn't," he said. "Oh, no, I'm not. God damn it." I said, "You're the only mathematician I got, and you got to go over there, take your slide ruler, one of the computers, and see what he wants." So he went up there and stayed about a half an hour. When he came back, I said, "Kelly, how did you do?" Oh, he says he's a nice old man. And he was. He was a soft-hearted guy, you know.
Oh, yeah. You got the dog.
I'm Edwin Steinmeier, Jr., Major at the time, and in the Patton War Room from in September of 44 until June of 45. And that was my main assignment as a maintenance officer, and this was not just sweeping the floor. All the information from the whole Army in command, enemy and tactical, our side, came to the war room, and we were responsible for keeping everything up to date and being ready for a briefing at 9 o'clock every morning, whether we moved or not. And we did move, just like a circus, and ended up with 22 different headquarters from the full time in England until the end in Germany. But I had one incident in Nazi France when I witnessed Patton cussing out the commanding general of the fortress Metz after the defeat of Metz. And Stillman has a little paragraph in there on this incident. Patton's office was right next to the war room, and I heard some commotion, and German general had been caught abandoning his troops at Metz and brought in front of Patton there. And Patton was so outraged with this commander that he made him stand at attention, and he cussed him out because he had abandoned his troops, and that wasn't the way a general should act. So that's well recorded there. Another time, I ate with General Patton. I didn't dine with him, but I ate. This was in Nancy, France. And Patton had his trailers, two of them, one he slept in and one he had an office in a pear orchard there, right where I had my tent, about 25 feet from him. And the pears were ripe. And I got up in the morning, I picked off a pear, and walked into the war room. And I was standing there looking over the situation to get ready for the briefing, and I was eating this pear, and all of a sudden I knew somebody was behind me, and I looked around, and here was Patton. He was eating a pear too, and he says, "I see you're living off the land too." I thought I knew what was going to happen to me. But another time I was really afraid, because he was spit and polished on everything. I had quit smoking, and he became a gum chewer. And he's waiting for him to come into the war room, and you know, when he came into the war room, they said, "Attention," and everybody sprang up like they'd break this roof. And here I had the gum wrapper, man. I dropped it right at my feet. And he came by, as he came by me, he spotted that gum wrapper. And I thought, oh boy, this is not good. That's a bad mark. I got by it, and I lasted till, as I say, 9 months in there. And it was an experience of my life, because every day was a crisis, and we had no excuses. We had to have everything up to date, and he knew whether it was up to date. He'd come in from going out with the troops, and he'd carry his Michelin map that he plotted everything where he'd been on it, and he'd come back and compare it with what we had on our maps, and he would add to it. And so this was my direct experience with him. And of course, I left the headquarters the 1st of June and went to the engineer combat unit that I had come from. I got into 1102nd Engineer Combat Group at Wurzburg, where Harvey was later. And I was there working with the Krauts on cleaning up the area around there, and I started a couple of factories. And we had a Pioneer Company out cutting pit props for the mines, and we got the mines started, and we were responsible for the roads all through that area, and we're cleaning canals. But I was assigned from this engineer combat group that really manages about four battalions and other engineer troops to the 283rd Engineer Combat Battalion at Swineford. And here I became an S3, and one of our jobs early on was to update the concern in Nuremberg to Geneva standards. And so I was the operation officer, and here we were without any supplies or anything, and our S2 and S4 were out looking for supplies for us to do this. And this was the concern there had 2,000 SS troops incarcerated there. They were taken out to mop up and clean up the city of Nuremberg with little mine carts and shovels and so on. So they were out of the way in the daytime. We went in and improved the security, the hygiene. We had to put in latrines and showers. We had showers there. They could march a platoon through at a time. And guard towers, for sure. We needed increased guarding there. It turned out that the SS killed about 4 of their own people about every night. And we didn't inquire why or what, but this was how it was there. And so we got through with that one successfully. This was the same time as the 282nd Engineer Battalion was bringing the buildings for the Nuremberg trials up to shape. So I was in Nuremberg the same time as this was built up for the trials. And we finished our job, and they assigned us right over to the infamous Hammelburg concentration and prison camp, and where at one point Patton's son-in-law had been incarcerated.
John Waters.
So we had to do the same thing there, bring it all up to Geneva standards. And the curious thing about it there was a whole company of white Russian women military personnel kept there. They were afraid to let the term loose to go back. They kept them there to protect them. So we witnessed this part of the thing. So that's about enough of my remembrance.
While we were in England, speaking again of March 1944, and when I say we, we're talking about the 3rd Army headquarters and all the troops under Patton's command. I was chief of the test and inspection section in 3rd Army, and when we got over to England, Patton briefed us. When he first met us, he said to us, among other things, remember, I'm not here. In other words, here he was, our commander in March of 1944, but he couldn't spread the word. Why? Because he was named head of an army group, a fictitious army group that had a huge buildup in southeast England in the Dover area to, in theory, cross at the Pas-de-Calais area, where 18 German divisions, some of the cream of the crop, armored units, were awaiting the invasion. And the reason the top command, including Hitler, thought that this was real because Patton was the most feared general by the Germans. and they respected him from his achievements in North Africa, Sicily, and also they had the record of him in the punitive expedition, 1916-17, and World War I. He was really the fightingest commander. Eisenhower had no experience in combat prior, and so many of the generals, including Bradley, didn't have any experience. So Patton really had the experience and was greatly feared for his great military achievements. And so this fictitious army group, we'd visit it, and we had rubber tanks, rubber vehicles, and all set up, the British and American forces, and the deception plan was a tremendous success because Rommel wanted to get some of those troops into the Normandy area and try and push us back into the sea during the initial invasion period. And as you know, it was very close. If you read D-Day and my colleague Steve Ambrose's writings about those days, certainly it was very precarious, and it could have been a disaster if those 18 divisions had been moved. So George Smith Patton played this very important role, deception role, and that's why he told us when we were first briefed, remember, I'm not here. And this was so vital, in my view, to the success in Europe. My name is Richard J. Stillman. I'm 83 years old, born February 20th, 1917, and I'm mighty thrilled to be around at this time. We're having our reunion here in Palm Springs and up at the Patton Museum to celebrate this great occasion. And I have three of my dear colleagues, and I'd like you to know their ages.
I am Robert E. Campbell. I am 83 years old. I was born June 25th, 1917. So Richard's only a couple months older than I am.
He's just a kid.
My name is Harvey Fraser, and I'm 84 years old. And I may be the oldest guy in this group. I don't know how about Ed.
I'm Edwin Steinmeier. I was born March 26, 1909. And I'm 91 and a half. Now. Good, and I'm planning to go to many more reunions.
He was with us in Europe, and he outdid a lot of us on it. We were so proud of him. But I would now like to have General Harvey Fraser talk about his careers from the time he started and arrived in this world, and his contributions. And I say very much he had Patton's approach. He prepared himself, he dedicated himself, he was flexible and creative, moved in very responsible different positions, and he's a great one. Harv, tell us a little background for him.
Knew a few cuss words too.
That's all right. We got a bleeper.
I graduated from West Point in 1939 and was sent to Hawaii, and was over there when the Pearl Harbor came. It was quite a experience, I'll tell you that, when you see the American Army and Navy and Marines all screwed up and don't know what the hell's going on. And it took some time to straighten that out. I commanded an engineer company at the time. We put in pillboxes and put up barbed wire by the millions of miles, getting ready for the Japs to make an invasion, which fortunately they never did, because at the Battle of Midway, we kind of wiped out their air carriers. So things were tight there until then. There was a lot of Army regular officers over there at the time, and they gave us all a chance to either stay there and fight the Pacific War or come back to the States and go to Europe. I wanted to be in the big war, so I came back to the States, was made an S3 of an engineer regiment in Camp White, Oregon, and spent a year getting them ready to go over to England. We got over there and we're in the airfield construction business and repair. I think we had 102 airfields that we were responsible for. In England, if you can get up in the air and it was clear, you could see 4 different aerodromes at the same time. So all you had to do was figure out the right one to come down on and not get on the wrong runway like somebody didn't.
That's sweet, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that, I was in the Eastern Base section. That was, they did the airfield business. And then we was made Brittany Base section in France. We were going to build a brand new port, start from scratch, at a place called Quiberon Bay. There was no port there. We were going to bring in bridges and pile drivers and limb timbers and build a port that would take 6 Liberty ships at the same time. And the stuff was all loaded on boats and on the way over there. But when Patton got loose in Normandy, and he started out into Brittany and then turned around, went the other way, they said, hell, we don't need any port. We're gonna get out, gather one up in Antwerp. So our whole mission then was stopped. And I tried like hell to get out of the service and supply. I wanted to be a combat officer. And then they transferred a lot of people out of headquarters, and I became the engineer base section. First thing I did, get myself ordered to Paris. This is just right after Paris fell. Everybody wanted to go to Paris, you know, but I wanted to go for a different reason. I wanted to see the engineer of the entire forces in Europe. And he was named Major General Moore. They called him Denny Moore. Well, he wasn't there, but a guy named Hardin was there. And I said, General, I'm tired of being in the service of supply. I want to get out and hear the gun shoot. I'm a regular officer and a graduate of West Point, and I think I'm wasting my time down there. I'm ashamed to draw my pay. He said, Harvey, you go back down to Rennes, France, and pack up your stuff and head up to the first Army, and I'll fix it so you won't be worried about drawing your pay. So I went up there and returned, reported to the engineer, 1st Army, and he finally signed me to the rearmost engineer combat battalion in the whole damn Army area. I was the furthest back, right next to the communication zone. I said, Jesus, General, I want to be a fighting soldier. Well, he said, Harvey, you go back there and do a good job, and I might be able to move you forward. So I went there, took over the outfit. 3 days later, the damn front line was right at my front door. And let me tell you, we had chaos going on there too. And never got worried about it. I was always in the front lines from that to the end of the war. And I didn't draw any pay for 3 months because I didn't have time. I took a bath on the 16th of December, and I didn't get another one until the 16th of March. Yeah, that's right. And we take a little spit bath out of the helmet, you know, and it's cold as hell in the bulge. So, and my outfit was then cited by the President of the United States, given a presidential citation for fighting as infantry during the Battle of the Bulge.
Harvey, tell them too then how you got back to military academy on the faculty and became department head, full professor, and then getting out of the service in your career, distinguished career after leaving the military.
Well, after the war was over, I was ordered back to the U.S. on rest, recuperation, and recovery. I'd been overseas 2.5 months at that time. I had lots of points, but I was a regular officer, and points didn't count for regulars, so they wouldn't send me home. Anyway, I went back in R&R, and I didn't want to go back to Europe anymore, so I went down to well, first of all, they sent me back with the history of the 3rd Army. Remember that great monstrous thing that you got?
Absolutely.
The initial copy of it. I was a courier on a Liberty ship. Took 21 days from Antwerp to back because of bad weather. Anyway, I went in to see the ground force engineer, told him, God, I'm a colonel, I don't want to go back over there. I've been over there long enough, I've got a kid I'd never seen. So,
Right.
but he said, Harvey, I'm going to fix it so you don't. So I went back to Illinois, pretty soon got orders to go to Nashville, Tennessee, and take command of a engineer camouflage battalion. Christ, an old combat soldier, and they're going to give him a camouflage battalion. Well, I didn't have to worry long because about 2 weeks later, I got orders to report to General Leslie Groves.
Oh, the
He was running the Manhattan District at the time. And a lot of people were getting out, and he wanted something.
Yeah.
And he put a fix on any graduate of the military academy who graduated 10th or under. And nobody in that category could ever be assigned without his permission. So I reported to General Groves, and I sat out in his goddamn office for 8 hours waiting for him to call me in. And I was pissed. I didn't tell you that goddamn combat soldier back here, the guy's never heard the gun shoot, and he'd make me sit out there. Anyway, he sent me down to Oak Ridge, and I became operations officer in one of the plants, gaseous diffusion plants. Finally, the Corps of Engineers wanted to send me to school, so I went out to Caltech to get a master's degree in civil engineering. And Groves, he kept a handle on every peel. So I was supposed to go back to Oak Ridge. But his deputy then was named, for Christ's sake, I can't remember. He was a full colonel at the time, and he was made a professor at West Point. Assistant number 2 professor in the department. And he talked Groves into letting me go. So then I went back to West Point, started out teaching mechanics, and I was in there off and on for the next 19 years. And, I never stayed there very long. I went on some special deals. Right in 1955, I took 24 cadets over to Europe, spreading goodwill from the military academy. It was 24 days and nights on the go.
That's when I had the pleasure of serving with you from 52 to 55 at the academy, yes.
And then I did a secret mission in Ethiopia. The commander of Strike Command said he had to have a professor to do a special job in Ethiopia. And I said, well, I'll go if I can take my wife with me. And they had to check with him. Well, he said that'd be a good idea. You can be the cover. So they issued me 2 passports. One as a tourist and one real passport as a military man if I got caught. So we went over and spent 3 weeks in Europe and Ethiopia, way out in the bush country with some sergeants. We went on a safari one time and were ambushed by a group of Somali bandits. Ethiopia is right on the border with Somalia. Finally got away from that. And I came back, got cited for what we did there. Saved the government millions of dollars. It's talking about doing something they wanted to do over there shouldn't have been doing. Had to do with military education. So anyway, in 1965, I decided I had enough soldiering, and I retired as a brigadier general and went to South Dakota, where I became president of South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. I stayed there 10 years. I figured if you couldn't do it in 10 years, you ought to get the hell out. So I moved on then, became a dean in Oregon Institute of Technology, and then I finally ended up at the California Maritime Academy.
Right.
I was the only brigadier general in the maritime business. Finally, I retired to Arizona and stayed there 12 years, then moved to Colorado. You're into
Isn't that a great career?
Right.
Remarkable careers, different careers, successful, so successful in each. And as I say, I thought it was a Patton, achievement. Very, very well done. So that's pretty much, the story of our relationship with General George Smith Patton Jr. that we all deeply admired. Picked up a little of his profanity, not as good as he was, and just had a hell of an experience. And so I want to thank very much my dear colleagues, Bob Campbell, Harvey Frazier, and Ed Steinmeier. I'm Richard Stillman, and we really enjoyed this privilege of being with you.
Thanks
Thank
for the
you.
privilege.
Thank you.